welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at nature versus nurture. We've got this really interesting conversation between a neuroscientist and an anthropologist, and I think you're going to find that they offer some unique perspectives that might change the way you think about the world and even yourself.
Yeah, what I think is so fascinating about this conversation is that it doesn't frame nature versus nurture like as a competition.
Right.
It's not this, or that it's actually, it explores this constant interplay between the two and how they're really intertwined, how they influence our thoughts, emotions, and actions.
Okay, so let's start with something I think we can all relate to, survival instincts. They talk about these 4 categories: fight, flight, freeze, and then fawn, like submission. So think about it this way. Imagine you're walking in the woods and suddenly you see a bear. What do you do?
Well, I mean, depending on your personality and, your past experiences, you might fight. You might run away, flight.
Yeah.
You might freeze up, just completely lock up. Or you might even try to appease the bear somehow by acting submissive.
Right.
And these are those primal instincts that are hardwired responses, really designed to protect us from danger.
Right, that makes total sense in that scenario, but what happens when those responses get triggered in everyday life? Like you're facing a deadline at work or you're arguing with a family member. I mean, it's not exactly a bear in the woods.
Exactly, and that's a great point. That's exactly the point they make in the conversation.
Yeah.
These instinctive responses, while they're essential for survival in dangerous situations, can become detrimental when they're chronically activated in situations that aren't actually life-threatening.
Got it. So it's kind of like our body's alarm system is going off for a fire drill when it's just someone burning toast,
Exactly. And that constant state of alert, that chronic stress can really take a toll on our bodies. I mean, think about it. When you're stressed, your heart races, digestion gets all messed up.
Yeah.
You might even get sick more often.
Totally. Stress wrecks my sleep and all I want is sugar. But how does this connect back to the brain?
Well, so this is where the neuroscience gets really interesting. The conversation highlights how chronic stress triggers the release of a hormone called cortisol. And when we have consistently high levels of cortisol, they can actually disrupt the balance in our hormonal system. And specifically, they talk about the HPA axis.
Okay.
Which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. It's basically our central stress response system.
So too much cortisol messes with our stress response system. Got it.
Right.
But how does that impact our daily lives?
So think about how you feel when you're super stressed. Can you focus on complex tasks? Do you feel like you have the energy to be creative or, make thoughtful decisions? Probably not.
Definitely not. I can barely remember where I put my keys, let alone, solve a complex problem.
Exactly. And that's because this chronic stress can impair the functioning of our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain responsible for, higher level thinking, planning, decision making. And it can also impact our emotional regulation, making us more susceptible to things like anxiety and depression.
Okay, this is starting to feel a little too real, but are you saying that our upbringing plays a role in how our brains actually react to stress?
Yeah. That's exactly what the conversation explores.
Wow.
Our early childhood experiences, particularly those involving trauma or chronic stress, can shape the sensitivity and activation of those primal instincts in adulthood.
Oh, wow.
So if we experience a lot of stress or trauma early on, our nervous system can actually become wired for this heightened sense of threat.
Okay.
And then, that leads to those chronic stress responses, even in situations that are relatively benign later in life.
So it's like our early experiences are creating this template for how our brains respond to the world.
Right.
That's pretty powerful.
It is. And it really highlights how important it is to understand not just the biological underpinnings, but also the psychological and social factors that contribute to these responses.
So we've established that our biology lays the groundwork, but then they talk about the role of culture, how our environment and our upbringing shape our beliefs and behaviors. It's like our brains come preloaded, with this incredible hardware, but then culture is what installs the software.
Precisely. Cultural norms and values act as that software, shaping how we interpret the world, what we believe, how we behave, even how we experience emotions. And that's why people from different cultures, they might react to the same situation in completely different ways.
Can you give me an example of how culture might shape our perception?
Sure. Let's take the concept of happiness.
Okay.
In some cultures, happiness is closely tied to, individual achievement and material success. While in other cultures, it's more about, social harmony and connection.
So someone growing up in a culture that emphasizes, individual success might feel happy about a promotion.
Right.
While someone from a more, collectivist culture might find happiness in spending time with friends and family.
Exactly. And those different perceptions of happiness can lead to very different life choices and behaviors.
That's fascinating. Culture gives us this framework for understanding and experiencing the world.
It does.
While that framework can be incredibly helpful, it can also be limiting, can it?
Right.
It can lead to, biases and prejudices that prevent us from seeing the world clearly and connecting with people who are different from us.
Absolutely.
So it's really important to be aware of our own cultural conditioning and to recognize that, our way of seeing things isn't the only way.
Absolutely. And that awareness, I think, can open us up to new possibilities, to greater understanding and compassion.
Now, you mentioned that culture acts like software, but software can be updated, right? So does that mean that we can change our cultural conditioning?
That's a great question. And it's something that they touch on in the conversation. Culture isn't static, it's always evolving.
Right.
People can adapt to new cultural environments and adopt new beliefs and behaviors. Think about somebody moving to a new country. They might start out feeling completely out of place.
Right.
But over time, they begin to integrate and adopt parts of that new culture.
It's like learning a new language, right?
Yeah.
At first, it's awkward and unfamiliar, but over time, with practice, it becomes more natural.
Exactly.
But I imagine that adaptation can also create some internal conflict, can it? Especially when you have deeply ingrained cultural beliefs clashing with evolving social norms.
Absolutely. So take shifting gender roles and expectations, for instance. Traditional beliefs about masculinity and femininity, might not align with how those concepts are being redefined in contemporary society.
Right.
And this can create tension, both within individuals and within society as a whole.
So we're constantly navigating this complex interplay, between our biology, our upbringing, and this ever-changing world.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the fascinating intersection of biology and culture. They bring up this really intriguing example about the Bajau people, known for their incredible freediving abilities. I mean, these folks can hold their breath for minutes at a time and dive to, incredible depths, all without any special equipment.
That's pretty amazing.
I've seen the documentaries. It's incredible. It looks almost superhuman.
It is remarkable.
Yeah.
And scientists believe that their environment, a life spent on and in the water, may have actually driven genetic adaptations over generations.
So you're saying that their lifestyle actually changed their biology?
That's one of the theories. One prominent hypothesis is that the Bajau have larger spleens than average. And the spleen acts as a reservoir, for oxygen-rich red blood cells. So a larger spleen means a greater oxygen reserve.
Wow.
Giving them a natural advantage when it comes to freediving.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like evolution in action, adapting to the demands of their environment. How does this relate back to the average person who isn't, spending their days freediving?
Well, it highlights the incredible plasticity of the human body and brain.
Okay.
While most of us aren't going to develop larger spleens from holding our breath, this example really underscores the dynamic interplay, between our genes and our environment.
So it's not just about the genes we inherit, it's also about how our environment and lifestyle can influence how those genes are expressed.
Exactly. And that leads us to the mind-blowing world of epigenetics. This is a concept that I think you might find really interesting. It suggests that our lifestyle choices, our diet, stress levels, even our social interactions can actually switch certain genes on or off. And get this, these changes can potentially be passed down to our children.
Hold on, are you saying that our actions today can actually impact the health and well-being of future generations?
That's the current thinking. It's a relatively new field of study, but it has some really profound implications.
Yeah.
Because it suggests that we have more control over our genetic legacy than we previously thought.
Wow, that's both empowering and a bit daunting at the same time. It makes you think about, the responsibility we have not just for our own well-being, but also for, the well-being of those who come after us.
Absolutely. And The conversation really highlights this with a personal anecdote.
Oh, right.
The neuroscientist shares her own experience with her second pregnancy and how, after learning about epigenetics, she became really committed to these healthy habits, eating nutritious foods, managing her stress levels, nurturing positive emotions because she wanted to pass on those positive genetic changes to her child.
That's incredible. It really flips the script on this whole nature versus nurture debate. It's not this or that. It's this dynamic dance between the two.
Right.
But they don't stop there. They touch upon this really controversial idea of inherited trauma.
Yes, this is where the conversation gets really thought-provoking.
Yeah.
The neuroscientist recounts an anecdote about her baby and how the baby had this instinctive fear of a toy tarantula.
Oh, wow.
Despite having no prior negative experiences, with spiders. And it raises this question. Can trauma actually be encoded in our genes and passed down to our offspring?
That's heavy stuff. It makes you wonder if we're carrying more than just our parents' physical traits. Maybe we're also inheriting some of their emotional baggage.
Yeah, it's a question that's generating a lot of debate and research. And while there aren't any definitive answers yet, it's certainly something to ponder.
Definitely food for thought. Okay, so we've covered primal instincts, cultural influences, and this complex interplay between them. We've seen how our genes and our environment are constantly shaping and reshape at who we are. Where do we go from here?
Well, next they delve into something that's deeply personal and often shrouded in mystery: spirituality, and this, human search for meaning.
It's interesting. You would think that spirituality would be something you could easily locate in the brain. Like there's a God spot or something. But they actually say that there isn't a specific brain region or hormone responsible for spirituality.
Not that we found yet, but what they do highlight is this universal human tendency across cultures and throughout history to connect with something larger than themselves.
Right.
Whether it's through organized religion, a connection to nature, or, a deep sense of purpose. We seem to be wired for meaning making, for something that transcends our everyday existence.
It's like this longing for something more, something beyond the material world. They even mentioned this 2012 McKinsey study that found this strong link between, strong spiritual beliefs and improved mental and physical health, especially in cultures where faith is openly embraced and integrated into daily life.
Right.
It makes you wonder if our brains are constantly seeking patterns and meaning. Could consciously choosing beliefs that support our well-being actually have a positive impact on our health? That's something I'm going to be thinking about long after this deep dive is over.
It's a powerful idea, isn't it? And it speaks to the incredible potential we have, to shape our own lives, not just through our actions, but through the beliefs we choose to embrace.
Wow, this conversation's already making me rethink some of my own beliefs. It's amazing how much ground we've covered, but there's so much more to explore.
Absolutely. We're just getting started.
We'll be back with part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into these fascinating insights. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so we're back for part 2 of our deep dive into nature versus nurture. I'm still really fascinated by that idea you were talking about before. How our beliefs can actually influence our physical and mental health?
Yeah, it is a really powerful concept, and it kind of ties into something else they explore in the conversation, this difference between happiness and peace.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. The neuroscientist talks about finding peace through her faith, and it really resonated with me because, I think like so many people, I've spent a lot of time chasing happiness, only to find that it's often fleeting.
Yeah, that's a really common experience.
Yeah.
Happiness can be so dependent on external circumstances,
Right.
which, as we all know, are constantly changing.
Yeah.
What the neuroscientist emphasizes is that peace, unlike happiness, provides this sense of stability and purpose and hope. Even when things are tough.
It's like that deep sense of knowing that everything's ultimately okay.
Right.
Even amidst the chaos of life.
Exactly. And she attributes this newfound peace to her faith, to this understanding that she's not alone, that there's a higher power guiding her path.
And then they go on to talk about surrendering control, how letting go of the need to control every outcome can actually lead to greater peace and resilience.
Yeah, she describes her experience of surrendering control to a higher power as being transformative.
Wow.
She talks about her own journey with depression and her gradual shift from demanding control to trusting in God's plan.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I know that when I'm clinging tightly to how I think things should be, I just end up feeling anxious and stressed.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to hold back the tide, But when we surrender, when we let go of that struggle, we create space for something greater to work in our lives.
And then she even suggests that surrendering control can have physiological benefits too. Like it can actually help to regulate our nervous system and dampen those, chronic fight or flight responses that we were talking about before.
Exactly. It's like by trusting in a higher power, you're signaling to your nervous system that we're not alone.
Yeah.
We don't have to constantly be on guard.
This all connects so beautifully with what they talk about next, this innate drive we all have for connection, both with each other and with something larger than ourselves. I've always felt this pull towards, something bigger.
Yeah.
Something beyond my individual existence. And it sounds like they're suggesting that this drive for connection is often expressed through spirituality.
Yes, and the anthropologist in the conversation, he points out that every culture throughout history has developed some form of spiritual practice or belief system.
Wow.
It seems to be like this fundamental aspect of the human experience.
It's fascinating to think about how this drive for connection can manifest in different ways across cultures, right?
Sure.
From organized religion to, personal rituals, even a deep connection with nature. Yeah. There are countless ways that we can seek to experience that sense of belonging and transcendence. And speaking of connection, they then shift gears a bit.
They do.
And they start talking about the impact of technology on our brains and our culture.
Yeah, and this is where the conversation takes, a little bit more of a critical turn.
Okay.
They express some concern about the potential downsides of our increasing reliance on technology.
Right.
Arguing that the constant stimulation and information overload can actually hinder our cognitive development, especially in young children.
I remember they even mentioned that some pediatricians are now recommending that, like, babies not be exposed to screens at all.
Yeah.
Because it can actually interfere with language development.
Right.
Other really crucial milestones.
It's a pretty stark warning, isn't it? It makes you wonder if our technological advancements are actually kind of undermining our ability to connect, with ourselves, with each other.
Yeah.
And even with the natural world.
It's like this paradox, right?
Yeah.
Technology can connect us in so many ways, but it can also create this sense of isolation and disconnect. But speaking of the natural world, I was really fascinated by their discussion of biophilia. This innate human tendency to connect with nature. I was thinking about it, how I always feel so much better after I've spent some time outdoors. Like something just relaxes and recharges in me.
Yeah, you're tapping into something they explore in depth. This idea that we've evolved over millennia to be in harmony with the natural world.
Right.
Our senses are designed to respond to the sights, the sounds, and the smells of nature. And they suggest that spending time in nature can actually help to regulate our nervous system, reduce stress, and improve our overall well-being.
It makes you wonder if our modern lifestyles, with all the time that we spend indoors, under artificial lights, staring at screens, if we're creating this disconnect, between our bodies and the natural rhythms of the earth.
That's exactly what they're proposing. And they actually link this back to our discussion about primal instincts.
Okay.
Suggesting that our modern environments might be contributing to that chronic activation of our stress response system.
It's like we're constantly bombarded with all of this stimuli, that our bodies are interpreting as threats.
Right.
Even though they're not actually dangerous. No wonder so many people are struggling with anxiety and stress these days.
It is a sobering thought. But the good news is that we can actively choose to incorporate more nature into our lives.
Right.
Whether it's a walk in the park, gardening, or even just gazing at the stars. Those small acts of connection with the natural world can have a really profound impact on our well-being.
Yeah, good reminder to put down the phone and step outside every once in a while.
Exactly. And speaking of stepping outside of our usual ways of thinking, they then delve into one of the biggest mysteries of all. Consciousness.
Oh, wow. Now that's a deep dive. It's a question that has fascinated, philosophers and scientists for centuries.
Right.
And it sounds like they acknowledge that science still doesn't have a definitive answer about, what consciousness is.
That's right. The neuroscientist, she admits that we still don't fully understand what consciousness is or where it comes from. Some theories say that it's an emergent property of the brain.
Right.
A result of this complex interplay of neurons and synapses. While others suggest that consciousness might actually be something that exists independently of the physical body.
It's almost like we're trying to understand the universe by looking through a telescope,
Yeah.
We can see so much, but there's still so much that remains hidden. But, one thing they do seem to agree on is that our consciousness is shaped by our experiences, our beliefs, and, our interactions with the world around us.
Yeah, and they emphasize this power of mindfulness.
Right.
Of paying attention to our thoughts, our emotions, our sensations in the present moment. As a way to cultivate greater self-awareness and maybe even influence the direction of our conscious experience.
So it's not just about what happens to us, it's also about how we choose to perceive and respond to those experiences.
Exactly. We have more agency than we often realize. And this leads them to a discussion about, the importance of finding meaning and purpose in life.
This is something I've been wrestling with lately, trying to figure out, what my purpose is, what I'm meant to do, with this one precious life.
Yeah, you're not alone. I think it's the question that a lot of us grapple with. And they suggest that having a sense of purpose can provide this really powerful source of motivation, resilience, and overall well-being.
Like having a compass,
Right.
that guides our decisions and actions, helps us navigate the complexities of life.
Exactly. And they challenge us to consider what truly matters to us, what we want to contribute to the world, and how we can align our actions with our values.
It's about moving beyond just, the pursuit of fleeting pleasures.
Right.
And finding something that gives our lives, a real sense of direction and significance.
You got it. And that search for meaning, that desire to contribute to something larger than ourselves, often intersects, with our spirituality, our connection to something beyond our individual ego.
This conversation is really making me think about my own life, my priorities and what I want to create in the world.
That's the beauty of these deep dives, isn't it?
Yeah.
They spark curiosity, challenge assumptions, and inspire us to live more consciously and intentionally.
It's like we're peeling back the layers, of ourselves and the world around us.
Right.
Discovering these new depths of understanding and connection. I can't wait to see where this conversation takes us next. We'll be back soon with part 3, where we'll continue to explore these amazing insights. Stay tuned. And we are back for the final part of our deep dive into nature versus nurture. It's hard to believe we're already at the end of this conversation. There have been so many light bulb moments.
Yeah. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've covered so much, from primal instincts and cultural influences to spirituality and consciousness, even this human search for meaning.
And I think through it all, I'm really struck by just how interconnected everything is. Our biology, our culture, our beliefs, it's all woven together, right?
Yeah.
And it creates this tapestry of the human experience.
It is a tapestry.
Yeah.
And it's constantly evolving as we, interact with the world and each other. And speaking of interaction, I found their discussion of social contagion really fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
This idea that emotions and behaviors, even beliefs, can spread through social networks, kind of like a virus.
It's like that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Right.
But they're saying it's not just personality traits.
Yeah.
It's things like happiness or depression. I mean, even obesity can spread through social connections.
Exactly. Think about how easily, laughter or yawning can be contagious.
Right.
Well, research suggests that, more complex emotional states and even health behaviors can also be influenced by our social networks.
So the people we surround ourselves with can have a measurable impact on our well-being.
Yeah.
Wow, that's both encouraging and a little daunting.
It is. And it highlights how important it is to be mindful, of our social circles.
Right.
And the influences that we're exposed to. But it also, raises this possibility we can create more positive social contagion, spread kindness, compassion, and healthy habits.
It's like we have a responsibility, not just for our own well-being, but also for the well-being of those around us.
That's a great point. And this idea of responsibility actually leads them to explore another fascinating topic, free will.
Okay, now that's a big one.
Yeah.
It's a concept philosophers have debated for centuries. Do we really have free will? Or are our choices, predetermined by our genes and our upbringing?
It's a complex issue for sure. They acknowledge that, our biology and our culture definitely influence our choices, but ultimately they assert that we do have this capacity to make conscious decisions, to choose how we respond to challenges and ultimately to shape the direction of our lives.
So it's not a simple either or. It's not just nature or nurture. It's both.
Exactly. While our genes and our upbringing provide this foundation, we have the power to build upon that foundation, to break free from, limiting patterns and to create something new.
It reminds me of that quote by Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom.
That's a perfect way to put it. We always have a choice. And it's in those moments of choice that we really define who we are and what we stand for.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways that you hope our listeners will, walk away with?
I think the most important takeaway is just that we're far more complex and interconnected than we often realize. Our biology, our culture, our beliefs, they all play a role in shaping who we are and how we experience the world.
And understanding that interconnectedness can empower us to make more conscious choices, to heal old wounds and cultivate greater well-being, and ultimately to live more meaningful and fulfilling lives.
Absolutely. It's about taking ownership of our lives, recognizing our inherent worth, and really embracing the power we have to shape our own destinies.
Well, before we go, is there one final thought-provoking question that we can leave our listeners with?
If our brains are constantly seeking patterns and meaning, how might consciously choosing beliefs that empower us, beliefs that foster connection, compassion, and resilience, how might that influence our physical and mental well-being?
What a powerful question. What beliefs are we feeding our minds? Are they serving us or are they holding us back? And what if, by consciously choosing beliefs that support our highest good, we could actually rewire our brains, transform our experience, and create a more loving and fulfilling reality? Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into the heart of what makes us human. We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring, this fascinating interplay of nature and nurture in your own life.